Just there. First of all, we make and break codes. We are exceptional at that. We call it cryptanalysis. It's something that we're founded on. So if you think back to World War II, Enigma, Purple, that's the beginnings for our agency. Secondly, hard targets. Foreign hard targets. If there's a hard target, we're going to be there. And we're going to be providing insights to our policymakers and certainly our warfighters. And third piece is big data. So we live in a world today with tremendous data. That's something that we deal with every single day at the National Security Agency. So a command and an agency, different authorities, different missions, but at the same time working in the same place in terms of cyberspace.
Well, as you mentioned, General, so you were there as Cybercom was being built almost a decade ago, and now you lead it. You've led it since last May. In that year or so, what have you learned about the threat environment that you're operating in and the capabilities that you have at your disposal? Where are you now, and where do you need to be?
Great question. If you think about, even a year, 9 years ago, think about the threat. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we thought about threat in terms of adversaries getting into our classified systems, looking for espionage work. We migrated that threat to looking at how adversaries are now conducting disruptive attacks against a number of our networks and a number of our businesses. And then third, we saw destructive attacks, certainly a recent one in 2014 with the destruction of Sony Pictures in the United States. But the one that I would add, and to get to your question, what's different now is this idea of corrosive threats. If you think about our adversaries operating below the level of armed conflict, trying to and working to steal our intellectual property, looking to leverage our personally identifiable information, and certainly trying to work towards disrupting our democratic processes. This is the adversary we face today, and certainly something that we're very focused on. I would say the recent work that we've done as part of a whole of government approach to secure the midterm elections is an example of an adversary and our reaction to it.
So when you say corrosive and destructive, what does that mean? Does that mean altering the integrity of the data itself, moving a decimal point, changing a digit? What does it mean?
Well, I would say, in terms of corrosive, there's broad categories. Think of, an adversary that's able to get into and steal intellectual property. You think about maybe that's a tactical event, but over a period of time, think about the strategic impact that can have on a nation, or the ability to, leverage our personally identifiable information. Stealing records, how do you use that information? How's that data going to be used? And then thirdly, as I mentioned, think about adversaries that are trying to disrupt our democratic process, our elections, influence operations, trying to create interference. That's what we're seeing, and that's one of the things that I'd say has changed most dramatically with the threat.
So as you mentioned in your opening remarks, NSA and Cybercom, can you talk about the intelligence objectives of the former and the military objectives of the latter, and how they can sometimes be in conflict, and what you do to resolve when they are?
Yeah, so I would offer so the National Security Agency is firstly a foreign intelligence collector, and we do a tremendous job of collecting, analyzing, and reporting on information. We're also a combat support agency, so if you think since 9/11, we've had 10,000 of our men and women deployed forward to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. So we clearly understand the intelligence picture. It's an intelligence picture that's worked very, very hard, and for policymakers or tactical warfighters, it's done every single day. At the same time, for U.S. Cyber Command, we have the focus in terms of looking at targets that are supporting these warfighters or supporting a broader objective. I would challenge the premise of conflict and say that what we are focused on at both NSA and Cyber Command is outcomes. We get to the outcomes that we think are most beneficial and are directed by our policymakers and senior leaders.
You, since taking the helm, appear to have opted to keep the dual-hatted position in place. So you are leader of both agencies. There's been talk for a long time that dual-hatted leadership needs to split, especially because there were indications that it was headed in that direction. What made you think that now is not the right time to split NSA and Cybercom?
So again, when I was confirmed for the position of Director of National Security Agency and Commander U.S. Cyber Command, it is a two-hatted position, as you've talked about. It's not my decision to make in terms of whether or not the hats are dual or they're split. Here's what I would say. This is all started with I'm the commander of a combatant command. I'm also the director of the largest intelligence element in the U.S. intelligence system. What I'm trying to get to in a space like cyberspace is speed, agility, and unity of effort. This is what we've seen when we bring together both an agency and command that's focused on outcomes.
Do you want to put a timeline on when you think that split will be appropriate?
But again, I would offer, this is not my decision to make. This is a policy decision eventually made by the president. I would imagine that they'll ask my opinion on it, and I'll provide that opinion.
Okay. So you have written that cybercom has evolved from a response force to a persistence force. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and what paved the way for that change in posture?
If you think about where our nation was over the past 10 years, even the past 5 years, we've seen adversaries that have been able to come into our networks, steal our intellectual property, conduct attacks in cyberspace, and there has been minimal response. I think what's changed over the past year is the idea that as a nation, we have to have a more proactive, forward-leaning approach to defense of our nation in cyberspace. So what's changed? Well, first of all, a national strategy on cybersecurity. The Department of Defense has written both a strategy and a posture review, and we at Cyber Command have offered the ideas in support of the DoD strategy, this idea of persistent engagement. Now we ask, hey, what's persistent engagement? It's two parts. First of all, it's the idea that we're going to enable our partners. We're going to enable the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, allies, even private industry. How do we do that? I'll give you an example. With the 2018 midterm elections, one of the things we did to enable was to provide indicators of compromise. What we had seen our threat adversaries doing, providing that through the Federal Bureau of Investigation or Department of Homeland Security to share either with social media companies or states. In terms of acting is the idea that we are going to be outside the United States to make sure that we understand what our adversaries are doing, providing indications to our policymakers and our warfighters of what the intent might be, and then if necessary and authorized, we are going to act against those adversaries so they understand that they can't conduct attacks against us, steal intellectual property, or interfere with our democratic institutions. 2/3 of persistent engagement is enabling. 1/3 is acting.
You mentioned that adversaries today, for the most part, are operating below the traditional use of force threshold. My question is, how well defined are those thresholds? How do you know when a cyber activity is an act of vandalism versus terrorism versus meddling versus war? How distinct are those categories? How are you thinking about that?
So, immediately jumped on the barrel. Question in terms of who determines at the end of the day, what is an act of war? That's our president. That's our elected officials. But I would offer that up until now, when we have been a very reactive force, our adversaries are really determining what was the level of action that they were to conduct against our nation, and they were really determining, how high that could go. What persistent engagement does, what the Department of Defense's idea of defend forward is, we do say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to continue to be reactive. We are going to warn, and we're going to obviously enable an act if authorized.
Here's a question that I've actually had suggested to me by some attendees at this conference, which is that private companies today, they lack the ability, legally or otherwise, to engage in that sort of forward defense to protect themselves, even when they are aggressed by even nation-state actors. So how are you thinking about what the role for government is in that problem?
So I think it's been commonly called maybe a hack back, that the private industry would hack back against adversaries. I think that's a very, very difficult concept. It's one that I think we need to be very, very careful about. The ability for our nation to address adversaries is something I think that's empowered with our government. That being said, I think the question becomes is how do we build this public-private partnership where we're rapidly sharing amongst the Department of Homeland Security, Federal Bureau of Investigation, private sector companies, even places like NSA and Cybercom rapidly to provide greater information, provide greater insights to private industry.
So are you comfortable saying where you would rank the United States capabilities in the cyber domain today vis-a-vis our near-peer adversaries?
Yes, I would. We're the best.
Okay.
Would you expect me to say something else?
No. Do you think that they think that?
So I can't speak to what they think. Here's what I can speak.
You don't know.
This is they will make their judgments on what they think. Here's what I want to make sure that I'm doing both as the commander and the director of the National Security Agency. One, that we have an incredibly ready force, that force is ready at all times. Two, that we have exquisite intelligence on what our adversaries are doing. And three, making sure that we're working as part of a whole of nation, whole of government approach to address these adversaries.
You have mentioned the elections. I absolutely want to go there because both NSA and Cybercom have been in the headlines more than usual in the past week and weeks. You got some rare public credit for successfully intervening against the Internet Research Agency in Russia ahead of the midterms, essentially taking them offline. You were the one who stood up the Russia small group that presumably was behind that operation. Beyond what has already been reported publicly by the Washington Post and Times, is there anything you want to tell us about that operation?
First of all, I would say that the successes that we had in security of the midterm elections is a reflection not of me, not of any one entity, but really a whole of government approach. Take a look. We're going to rewind to July and August when there were press conferences where the Director of Homeland Security, Director of the FBI, Director of National Intelligence, myself, all stood on the podium and talked about what we were doing. This was done collaboratively together. That being said, I am very proud of the work that was done at Cyber Command and the National Security Agency. We should feel very good that we acted with speed, agility, and unity of purpose.
What do you anticipate having to do ahead of 2020?
It's interesting you ask me that, Olivia, because recently at a town hall, when I was in Texas, one of the people that worked at the National Security Agency said, "Hey, General, I understand all the work that was done in securing our midterm elections and doing that type of work. When can we get back to counterterrorism?" Well, I would offer that this is where we're at today. This is an important piece of what the adversary is doing to us and how we have to be poised and ready for the future. You speak of 2020. So 2020 begins now. The best thing that we can do is continue to understand our adversaries, continue to build our readiness, continue to build our partnerships, and certainly be vigilant. What we anticipate is going to be a very interesting election year.
Can you be any more specific than that, though? Because even the worldwide threat assessment this year said that our adversaries are probably planning now. They're refining their techniques. They're potentially deploying more sophisticated techniques. They may be working together. Is there anything more you can say about what you see coming down the pike that we may need to anticipate, even, not just in the intelligence community, but as an American public?
Yeah, I think I would come back to this discussion on influence and adversaries' ability to conduct influence operations against our nation. I think we have to be very, very wary of that. I think we have to understand it. I think we have to share broadly to ensure that what we know, whether it's in the intelligence community or in the private sector, is rapidly exposed. I think that's the key piece that we learned in 2016, 2018, and I think it's going to be very important in 2020 as well.
Let's touch on one other headline before we turn in a more fulsome fashion to Russia. So it emerged that the NSA may end this once controversial program of collecting bulk telephone data because it lacked operational value. Has a decision been made about that program at the NSA?
So I'm aware of the reporting. We're in a deliberative process right now. We'll work very, very closely, certainly with the administration and Congress, to see and to make recommendations on what authorities should be reauthorized on this act. And I would just offer, we're in deliberations right now.
Okay, so nothing you want to say to Congress right now about whether you will want those legal provisions reauthorized at the end of the year?
I think it's probably better for me to answer the next question.
Okay. Are you sure? Well, I guess so, because what some have drawn from that report is that the operational value of that program has been degraded in part because of this shift to encrypted messaging apps, which have presumably taken the place of phone calls. Yesterday, the FBI director said that encryption should have limits. What is your take?
So I think a couple pieces. I did see the clips from Director Ray's, and I thought he did a marvelous job talking yesterday. A couple things. One, we certainly see the migration of our adversaries, terrorists, to different forms of communication. We track that very carefully. You would expect us to do that. I think Director Ray's comments yesterday are very, very important for us as a nation to listen to. I thought he made some very important comments with regards to it's not the fact that he wants to weaken encryption any more than the fact that he would imagine that folks that are encrypting messages want to weaken national security. We at the National Security Agency believe very fully in encryption, and we work that very hard. But I do think that we as a nation, we have to have this discussion in terms of when there's a legal process, how do we make sure that the health and security of our citizens is balanced forthrightly with the privacy of our nation's citizens as well.
Generally speaking, what has commercial encryption, both for data at rest and data in motion, done for the NSA's collection capabilities and for that of our adversaries who are trying to collect on us?
So I won't get into specifics in terms of necessarily what we've done, and that's here's what I would offer is that we see increasingly capable adversaries. We should not be surprised that they are utilizing various forms of encryption, that they're using various forms of communicative techniques. We're very, very good at that, and we watch our foreign adversaries that do this, and we track them very, very carefully. And this is something that we take very seriously. And I think that as we look to the future, this is going to be one of the issues that we'll continue to address.
So, Russia. I don't know that this is in response to the measures that Russia's small group took, and nor do I think you will tell me. But there was a report that the Russian government is now considering the creation of a sovereign internet, something that would be able to control information flows internally and presumably repel any U.S. efforts to encroach upon it. What would that mean for your work?
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, we've seen this with other nations as well, as you're probably well aware. And Iran has said this. Other nations have said this. But at the end of the day, what we've seen is that citizens are very, very anxious to get to apps that are very, very familiar to us. So while we watch this, while we take note of what they're trying to do, I guess I would say I'm a bit skeptical that they will be able to pull this off at this time.
So you don't think it'll come to pass? Not a problem to worry about.
So I would offer that one of the things that I think this is very difficult in terms of them doing it. If they're able to be able to pull this off, certainly we're going to be there. As I mentioned, this is one of the comparative advantages of the agency. We're going to be on hard targets. But I think this is much more difficult than a simple press statement.
And what do you think that was? Because it wasn't really an escalation, but it was certainly a response to some of what was reported in our press.
Well, I think if you take a step back, think about, we had the idea really in 2010, 2011 of the internet being this marvelous way of being able to spread the ideas of democracy. I think at the same time our adversaries looked at that, they said that's an existential threat to our being. And so what do you see from really 2012 on? You see this type of work to, further secure data or further secure operating systems or further block influences from outside a nation into these totalitarian states. So the idea that, a state like Russia or Iran or other states are going to build their own sovereign internet, I can understand that because I think that what they're looking at is really this idea of, the flow of information, if it can't be stopped, that is a threat to the type of government that you're running.
In terms of Russia's activities here, so the Director of National Intelligence has said that those foreign influence operations are ongoing. You said it also. Director Wray said it also yesterday. He said it was virtually unabated. So at what level is that happening compared to 2016? Is it intensifying? Is it speeding up? And are others taking notice and engaging in some copycat activity here?
So I think that this is, as I mentioned, if you take a lesson from the recent elections, this is one we've got to look at very carefully. I think that our adversaries see the ability to utilize social media or utilize trolls or utilize a campaign of messaging to a nation like ourselves and play both sides of an issue. I think it's here for us to say, as I mentioned, I think that this is going to be something that other adversaries are going to copy. But there are things that we can do. I think this is this idea, again, of being able to work closely with the private sector, working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation or Department of Homeland Security. This is where we have to share information. This is really important to us.
What do you say, though, the fact that it is ongoing? I mean, is this a new normal? Is this something that we have to get used to? Or is this something that we, at some point, are going to find a way to say, Russia, others, cut it out. We're not going to stand for this anymore?
Thank you.
Well, I think this is a new normal in terms of the way that people communicate, and certainly the way that our adversaries communicate. I think that what we have to do is we have to understand their techniques. I think that when we see an ability for a nation to create personas and to create followers, any way that we can share information about that to ensure that social media companies are turning those folks off and closing those accounts, that's impactful. That's getting at the heart of the matter. That's showing success for us.
But the core behavior hasn't changed. You yourself said that one of the most important things you want to see is a change in Russia's behavior. Why have we, despite sanctions, despite pushback, despite some of these operations we're seeing reported publicly now, not affected any change in their behavior?
Well, I think it's still too early to tell, right? I think that one of the things coming back to this idea of persistent engagement, it can't be episodic. You have to be involved every day. You have to be aware of what your adversary is doing. And so if you approach it like that over time, I think you have an impact. I think there's a cost on the adversary. It's much more difficult to do what they're doing. But I think we can't measure it in terms of months. I think it's going to be longer than that.
China. So a number of national security officials have said that for too long the U.S. has been under-focused on this problem. How are you positioning Cybercom and the NSA to deal with the breadth of threats that are coming from Beijing?
Well, first of all, I think is a realization. I think our national security strategy, our national defense strategy really lay it out very well. We're in a period of great competition. If I might give you an example, I took over on the 4th of May, and the following week I received a briefing, and it said, a Chinese hospital ship is making its way through the Panama Canal, headed to Central and South America. It really struck me. I was like, wow, a Chinese hospital ship is doing medical capability stops in Central and South America. This is the world in which we live. This is an ability for China using its economic power to now position itself. And so I think, to your question, what we have to do in the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command is understand that, is understand what they're doing, continue to provide great intelligence, and most importantly, continue to provide options to our policymakers.
In considering Huawei in particular, do you think that the relevant entities in the United States, public and private sector, have the right understanding of the threat, such as it is posed by Huawei? Is the threat overblown, underappreciated, or kind of on target?
I think it's interesting over the past several months. I think we've really kind of started to have this discussion about fifth generation wireless. What does it mean? Even my parents, who are 91 years old, asked me on the phone, hey, Paul, what is fifth generation wireless? Why is it so important to us? And I think from that is the discussion that we've had, not only within the United States, in our intelligence community, with our partners, getting kind of a baseline of what's the threat? What's the risk that we want to accept to a technology that has been compared from moving from the radio to the television? And so are we comfortable with a single nation being able to have control of our infrastructure? I think that's the risk decision that we're starting to work our way through right now.
Some of our partners and allies, though, Germany and our Five Eyes partner, Great Britain, have indicated that they think that they might be able to mitigate some of the threat of Huawei components in their as they build out their 5G networks. Have you communicated with your counterparts there? I presume you don't share that view, so wondering what those conversations are like.
We have ongoing communications with our partners. And you can well imagine that my counterparts, just like I am, we're providing technical advice to governments that will make a policy decision. But I would say that across the board that we've been very successful in being able to get to a common understanding of the threat and also having a very, very robust risk discussion. But this is a discussion that's going to continue for some time.
Well, if the UK, or Canada for that matter, decide, okay, we're going to let Huawei in, what implications does that have for our Five Eyes Alliance in particular?
So I think that's still a determination that hasn't been made. And so I think we're gonna wait and have a very, very continued dialogue with our Five Eyes partners about the challenges, the risks. But I think that that we would have to really consider what the implications would be if a decision like that was made.
Interesting. Huawei's founder has been pretty bullish on this. They've engaged in something of a charm offensive of late. But the founder said recently, there's no way the U.S. can crush us and the world cannot leave us because essentially they're already too advanced. Is that just bluster, or is that something of an uncomfortable truth?
I think I come back to, again, if we think about fifth generation wireless and how important it's going to be to our nation, to the world, in my mind, I'm starting to think through the fact, are we comfortable with a nation that doesn't share our rule of law, that doesn't share our norms, that doesn't have due process like we have, having that much control of our communications within our nation? A country that has very, very strong and deliberate ties to their private sector, that concerns me a lot.
More broadly, China is investing tremendously in AI, machine learning, quantum computing. What, if any, is the gap there between us and them, and where do we need to accelerate our efforts?
So I think to the latter part of your question, we need to ensure that as we look at the growth of our talent, and this is a great place to talk about talent because there's so much here. One of the things that we have to be cognizant of is we have to develop this talent from K through college. And so one of the things that we've done at the National Security Agency is try to foment this idea of it is really interesting to be in science, technology, engineering, mathematics. You've probably heard of Gen Cyber, where we've been able to train over 12,000 students between K and 12 and 3,000 teachers in the benefits of STEM. We have to continue to accelerate this idea of talent because talent is what's going to get after AI, what's going to get after machine learning, quantum, deep learning. That's the piece that I think that we as a nation, much as we did during the space race, needs to really take on.
I want to talk about talent a little bit later, but first I want to ask you a question about North Korea because what does it say to you? These reports came out just recently also that North Korea, as the Hanoi summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim was taking place, was actively hacking our businesses and government agencies. What does that tell you about their activities generally in the cyber domain? What does that tell you sort of about their attitude?
So when you take a look at North Korea, I think we're very, very familiar with North Korea's capability and certainly their intent. They've had both the capability and intent to strike our nation destructively in cyberspace. It doesn't surprise me that they continue to try to improve their capabilities in cyberspace. This is why, coming back to the idea of why we have to be so vigilant, why we have to have thoughts like persistent engagement ongoing, I think is important to our nation.
By virtue of having more contact with them, has that helped us learn more about them from an intelligence perspective?
So I would just offer not to get too deep in the operational details. So we have a very good understanding of North Korean threats in cyberspace, and we continue to improve that understanding every single day.
Okay. Similar question about Iran and China, who are engaging in similar activities. Do you see those as happening in response to policies of this administration in particular, or generally speaking as part of a trend as they build up their own capabilities?
I see both China and Iran as having long-term cyberspace goals that they have been operating through many administrations. And they've done this. They are very adept in terms of many of the things that they have done. And again, this idea of operating below the level of armed conflict, if you think about the Chinese and their ability to target specific industries for many years and stealing their intellectual property, or the Iranians as they've on many occasions conducted disruptive attacks against our nation.
ISIS. So the administration has declared, the president and members of his administration have said that ISIS is decimated, at least territorially. We're going to, 100% issue their territorial defeat. You were commander of Joint Task Force Ares, which was charged with conducting cyber attacks against ISIS several years back. What does that battle look like in the cyber domain?
So we call ISIS in northern Iraq and Syria ISIS core. When we started out in 2015, I would tell you that the quantity and the quality of the products, the ability for ISIS to recruit online, the ability to raise money, to proselytize, was at an all-time high. It's not there today. That being said, this is also a domain, cyberspace, where you have to ensure that you continue to maintain vigilance on a threat like ISIS. Because ISIS isn't only ISIS core, it's ISIS Philippines, it's ISIS Sinai, it's ISIS Afghanistan. They move very rapidly. We have to be just as agile and just as rapid to recognize those threats and then to act when authorized.
Would you offer a percentage defeat?
I wouldn't. Here's what I would offer is the idea that, one, that this is not the same ISIS that's operating virtually today than it was several years ago. But I would also offer that that's only because we have been continually ensuring that we're vigilant against them and operating against them when authorized. And we will continue to do that.
So those efforts are ongoing?
They are ongoing.
Generally speaking, do you have the latitude and the authorities you need now for offensive operations?
I have all the authorities that I need right now to conduct full spectrum operations. That's defensive operations all the way to offensive operations. And when I don't have those authorities, I will certainly ask for them.
That's a shift, though, right? Because there was some frustration. Your predecessor articulated it at the time that you simply had your hands tied. So what has changed? What
has changed over the past year? I would say a number number of changes have taken place. One, we have a national cyberspace strategy now. Secondly, we have strategies that cover how we're going to operate within the Department of Defense. Third, our National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 specifically called out operating cyberspace as an entity of a traditional military activity. It encouraged us to operate off of the Department of Defense information networks. It also encouraged us to work closely with the Department of Homeland Security. And the last piece is, I think that there has been a tremendous commitment by the executive branch, the legislative branch, to ensure that we can operate at the speed of cyber, and we've done so.
So generally speaking, how do you grade this administration for its recognition of, preparation for, response to the cyber threats of today and of tomorrow?
So, well, I won't get...
It's 73 miles an hour after about 5 seconds. That's fucking retarded. It's really good. You still got Or that what oh, that could but in general. What the fuck is that? Looks like the guy who fucking like spraying your ass. Right.
Anyway, whatever. I wish you would wait till I see it. When I come out myself. Anyway, what it is called the body